Well, hello there. Welcome back to the channel. My name is James, and here at 20th and 21st Movies, we are about all things cinema. Well, today I am continuing this series that I've titled on this channel called Backlog Treasures. And in this series, what I do is I go through my backlog in my physical media collection. So I'll select a title that I picked up, say, a year ago, 2 years ago, maybe even longer in some cases. And in some cases, titles that I may have picked up more recently, but for whatever reason, I just haven't gotten around to watching them yet. Now, I try to, when I pick up physical media, I try to watch these titles very soon after I get them. In some cases, I'll watch them the first day I get them. So I'll get them on, Blues Day, Tuesday, and I'll pop it in the player and go ahead and watch it. So it just depends on the title, but inevitably, there's going to be some titles that I pick up and they'll go on my shelf, and a year will pass by or 2 years will pass by, and I'll look on my shelf and I'll say, oh, wow, I haven't watched that yet, So these are titles that I'm making an effort to try to go through and whittle down this backlog. Try to reduce the backlog somewhat this year. Now, the funny thing about that is, as a physical media collector, I get so excited about these titles that are coming out that as I'm trying to reduce the backlog, I'm also sort of adding to it. So I'm trying to whittle it down, but I keep adding to it. So it's that never-ending cycle that we as physical media collectors tend to get into. So, it's all fun. It's all part of, I guess, the joys of physical media collecting. So I'm trying to work through my backlog. And in episode 7, which came out a couple of weeks ago, I focused on a Criterion Collection title because we are a few weeks away from what we hope to be a 50% off sale at Barnes & Noble for all Criterion titles. So fingers crossed that happens in the month of July, as well as in recent years, Amazon.com has had a matching 50% off sale online. So hoping that both of those happen in the month of July. Don't know for sure. We shall see in the coming weeks. But in preparation for that, on episode 7, I covered A Chronicle of a Summer, which is a great French documentary to consider for an upcoming Criterion Collection sale. And in this episode 8 of Backlog Treasures, I am covering a film from director Gordon Parks. And this will be the first of 2 discussions that I have on this channel about Gordon Parks' films. So the first part is The Learning Tree, 1969 film from Gordon Parks, a semi-autobiographical coming-of-age story from this historical director. And the second discussion we'll have in a couple weeks will be a full review of the 4K release of Shaft from Gordon Parks, which I am through the moon excited about that title coming out. I've been playing that theme song from Isaac Hayes on my Spotify. I've been taking my walks through the neighborhood and just playing that just continuously, and it's just in my head, and I just cannot wait to see that film on 4K Ultra HD. So that's part 2. Part 1 today is a Backlog Treasures overview of The Learning Tree. So this is a semi-autobiographical film that's based partly on Gordon Parks' life. And of course, Gordon Parks was born in and grew up in Kansas in the 1920s. So this film from 1969 is a period piece that takes place in the 1920s. And it stars Kyle Johnson as Newt. He's a young man growing up in Kansas, during this time. And you also have Marcus, who is played by Alex Clark, who is sort of a friend, more like a frenemy or a rival in this film. He's a young man that gets into some trouble. He's a troubled youth. And you see the dynamics between their relationship, the dynamics of Newt with love interest in his life. And it's just a coming of age story that deals with teenage relationships, family relationships and dynamics. It deals with first love and just all the things that young people go through. And on top of that, you add the element of the racial dynamics that were at play as well, because this is Kansas in the 1920s. So that's one of the interesting aspects of this film, The Learning Tree, is the racial dynamics, in addition to the coming of age elements, that makes this a very complex and dynamic and interesting story to watch. It's a story that I definitely need to revisit because there's so many themes that are covered between the coming of age themes in a racially charged environment in the 1920s in Kansas. And I definitely want to revisit this title very soon to sort of let it wash over me a little bit more. But again, very fascinating film. This is a historical film because this is the first film directed by a Black American director for the Hollywood studio system. So this is a film that made history, or Gordon Parks made history with this film by being the first Black American director to direct a Hollywood studio film. And it's 1969's The Learning Tree from Gordon Parks. Of course, a few years later, Gordon Parks would go on to direct Shaft and several other films. Gordon Parks started off as a photographer, I believe, and he not only wrote this film, but he directed it, and he also composed the music for The Learning Tree. So Gordon Parks was a bit of a Renaissance man, a man of many talents. In addition to being a great photographer, he had an eye for, being able to frame up a scene and to compose a shot. He knew exactly what he wanted from a photographic standpoint, and he was able to translate that to his direction. Okay, so for me, the biggest attraction of this release in the Criterion Collection is not just the film itself. The film itself is pretty good. It's quite good, actually. It's very insightful, but I think for me, the biggest draw of this release overall from the Criterion Collection of The Learning Tree from Gordon Parks, the biggest draw of this release is what you learn about Gordon Parks in the special features. So when you look at the special features, one feature I'll draw your attention to that I found very fascinating is a feature called My Father, Gordon Parks from 1969. This is a documentary that was made on the set of The Learning Tree that was narrated by Gordon Parks' son, Gordon Parks Jr., who also, I believe, became a filmmaker. You'll see on the back here, it's called My Father. Hopefully you can read that. I'll hold this here for a second. But it is a documentary on set that is narrated by Gordon Parks' son. Now, tragically, Gordon Parks' son died at a young age. I'm not sure the circumstances that occurred there, but his son, Gordon Parks Jr., died at a young age. So that's a piece of tragedy that director Gordon Parks experienced in his life through the years. But Gordon Parks Jr. in 1969 did a wonderful documentary talking about his father, showing his father's filmmaking techniques, and really just showing his father's influences on him as a young filmmaker and the impressions that he got from his father's work. So really enjoyed that. And then there are some other interviews on here from other filmmakers talking about the influences that Gordon Parks had on them in their filmmaking. So some fantastic special features on this release. So this is a release that is an easy recommendation for me. So if you're looking at some titles to pick up for this upcoming Criterion Collection sale and you're wondering what are some titles that may not be high on the radar that I might consider picking up, I would definitely recommend taking a look at The Learning Tree. This is a fascinating historical film that's a good film to watch, very interesting, very insightful about life in Kansas in the 1920s from the perspective of a young Black man, semi-autobiographical story based in part on the life of Gordon Parks. You learn a lot about Gordon Parks in the special features of this release. So, I mean, that to me is one of the biggest aspects of this release. And then from a technical standpoint, I was very impressed with how nice this high definition presentation looked. Of course, this is a new 2K digital restoration. You have an uncompressed monaural soundtrack. So the sound was fine, sounded great. I could hear everything very well, but the picture was very impressive, I found. So I was very impressed with the 1080p presentation on this Blu-ray disc from Criterion of The Learning Tree. And overall, this is an edition that is an easy recommendation. So as you're putting together your list for the upcoming Barnes & Noble, hopefully Barnes & Noble, Amazon.com Criterion sale, definitely keep The Learning Tree in mind. It is definitely worth a consideration. So that is this edition of Backlog Treasures, episode 8, The Learning Tree by Gordon Parks, 1969. Definitely one to keep in mind. But let me know in the comment section below, what do you think about this title? Have you seen The Learning Tree? Have you seen other films from Gordon Parks? Let me know what you think about the works of Gordon Parks and the Learning Tree in the comments below. And also let me know what other titles you are thinking about picking up as part of this upcoming Barnes & Noble Criterion sale. Let me know that in the comments below. As always, thanks for watching, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time at the movies. Peace.